Boy, that's quite a title you had there at WeWork.
I know.
Imagine, I think we'll try and find out what that meant. But when we talk about WeWork, and it seems like we do a lot of talking about WeWork lately, everyone has an opinion, including my Uber driver bringing me over here. Lakshmi had an interesting job, Director of Workplace Connection. And when we think of WeWork, everyone who has an opinion, which is all of us, talks about crazy valuation. They talk about dysfunctional management, perhaps. They talk about a brand new and yet not quite proven business model.
Yeah.
My
we're
favorite,
get to the good stuff, right?
all the good stuff. And my favorite is the quite beautiful Gulfstream 650 they had.
Never saw it.
I have a little plane envy, no question about it. But rather than just assume that all of it was bad and there was excess and assign it at the top, I had the opportunity to be introduced by a new friend of mine, Doug McMillan. Doug worked as a head of communications at WeWork, and he now has joined a firm called Copperfield, run by Andy Whitehouse. And it's an interesting strategic marketing firm. They do some really incredible work. And he introduced me to you just recently, just several weeks ago. And I thought, what an opportunity to say, okay, we know what the headlines are, but this is an unbelievable laboratory. What lessons are there to be learned? And when I heard what your role was, and then when we had a chance to meet, I said, this is something we really can learn from. And all of us who manage an enterprise of more than one person is concerned about culture in the workplace, culture in general, and in particular in the workplace. And WeWork changed a lot of things. So rather than ask you what things did we learn, let's start a little bit about learning what Lakshmi is all about. You grew up, your parents were born in India. You grew up outside of Chicago.
Yeah, outside Chicago. And kind of had a meandering journey, I think I told you about. So I went to college and dropped out pretty early on. And
where did you go?
I went to Johns Hopkins. Yeah, not a place that people drop out from a lot. So,
but then you went pursuing a real career aspiration of yours.
Yes, I became a bartender. Yes, I did.
Being an Irish Catholic kid from Queens, New York, that was a genetic requirement for me, but not for you.
No, not a lot of Indian bartenders. I was a bartender for about 3 years after that, and part of the reason I became a bartender, which I think sometimes people have a hard time believing now, is I actually had a really hard time talking to people and connecting with them, which is part of why I dropped out of college. Just did not feel like I fit in, didn't feel like I could
Academically,
really make
you
friends.
were fine, but socially, you never connected?
Okay, so academically, I wasn't doing that great either.
Yeah.
But I'm assuming.
It's all out now.
But I think they're tied. But I mean, it's true when you feel isolated and don't feel like you belong. I can't imagine it's very easy to do well in school either. Yeah. So I left and.
See, I felt very comfortable socially, but academically, I wasn't up to it.
Okay, well, you're well adjusted then. I don't know.
I'm in progress.
Okay. So I did that for about 3 years, and then I went back to school and finished, and then became a bartender again.
Now
did that again.
Certified.
Yeah. But I also started working very closely with community organizers in Chicago.
So you're the second Chicago community organizer I know.
Yeah, there's another one. Yeah, I actually have never met him, but yes, there's a couple of community organizers. But I think what I learned from that process is how important it is to get to know people on a personal one-to-one level. Because community organizers, what they do, as we know, they are literally going door to door and getting to know who lives in the community, and then hopefully mobilizing them on election day. And then after that, I went and worked in brand strategy.
You went to work for a big Chicago firm.
Yes, went to work for a big Chicago ad firm.
Did that come from your bartending job?
Did that come from my bartending job?
Did you meet people bartending that caused you to go to work there?
No, but that would have been a really cool.
That would have been a good story.
I
think we could change it.
I know, we should make that up.
For the book.
Yes. No, I did not. But I went to grad school and then worked at a big agency. And while I was at that agency, I had this idea for how I was going to transform the dating world. And I ended up starting my own offline singles event business.
Offline?
Offline, yes. And this was back in 2009, 2010. So at that time, doing offline events and trying to take things away from the computer and apps was actually pretty revolutionary. People thought it was not a good idea.
So staged local events?
So yes, local events. And this was right before Tinder came out. So, and I always, when I do talks about this part of my
You have
life.
to go slow, I'm old, Tinder,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, I usually have to remind people that there was a world before Tinder, and it was great. So I started designing offline events because it was when online dating was really, really taking off. And one of the things I started noticing about people is they started acting out as if they were a consumer of other people rather than a human. And so if you look at how a lot of online dating
Running
apps,
down a checklist all the time.
right, yeah. So they are very much designed after e-commerce principles. And so what you do when people engage in that platform, they actually turn into consumers of other people. And so I remember thinking wow, this like a lot of the things we're talking about, this is really great. There are going to be a lot of benefits from having these online dating apps, but we're going to lose something in the process. And so
But as I walk around any of our offices, I would say probably 75% of the young people, oh, I'm getting married. Well, how did you guys meet? I would say 75% say they've met online.
yeah, and those numbers are going up. And it's not that there's not something good from it, but when you really talk to people, you will also hear how horrible the experience is. You'll hear both.
Yep.
And so I really wanted to...
The experience of using an online app or the experience of getting married? Married a long time, so you know. All good.
I think we should interview you. Yes, that
So
experience.
tell me what one of these offline events would look like.
So they were, I had a particular format that I used that would help people not talk about what would be on their online dating profile, but the things that usually take a little while in order to get to know somebody. So I was trying to get people out of pitch mode, because that's very much how the apps are set up. You have to kind of pitch yourself.
Yep.
And typically the system is built so that people are reduced down to 4 key data points: age, weight, height, income, right? And as we know, whenever we reduce people to things like that, we start to forget that people are multidimensional. They have stories, they have backgrounds, they have so much more to offer. And those are actually the ingredients of connection, not just those 4 data points. So I organized these events. They were in person, and there were so many little and large things that we did to really get people kind of out of their heads and into getting to know other people. But we always did interesting things so that people had a real reason to connect. So I'll just give you one example. So one of the things, and it's hard to think about this, but one of the things that prevents a lot of people from dating is especially in big cities, is if they don't live on adjacent subway lines, right? It sounds silly, but you'll meet a nice guy and then they're like, oh, I'm on the G, and you're like, can't do it, right? And I was doing these events in Chicago, and so there's 2 subway lines. There's the red line and the brown line, and those are the 2 subway lines that have the most transfer points. So I did an event one time, so in order to come to the event, you had to live on one of those 2 subway lines, right? And so, it sounds silly, but if you think about it, where you live, what subway line you live off has a lot to do with what you do and your identity. And so all of a sudden, people were connecting on a very genuine piece of information.
So you're the shy girl, becomes a bartender to be where the action is, so you don't feel uncomfortable. You migrate into this dating world, and how do you wind up at WeWork?
So I did this singles event idea, and then I got approached by Match.com, and they had just started their offline events business. So I went there for 3.5 years and helped really design, think about how do you design the offline experience. And then I left, and then I went back to bartending. I think I had to be a bartender again. And then while I was doing that, I got a call from WeWork. They wanted me to come do a talk. And I did a talk about how the principles of dating actually had a lot of application in the workplace. Yep. The same way that we make snap judgments in dating, we tend to do that in the workplace. And how do you cultivate interactions in the workplace.
So were you in Dallas at that time
I was in Dallas.
with Match? And now they recruit you to New York in sort of a whirlwind kind of fashion.
Yes, it happened very quickly.
Yep.
So I did a talk, I remember, on May 8th, and I was fully moved in New York City by June 11th. Yeah,
Works?
it was fast. Yeah.
And you're there to do what?
So when I first got there, I think they just said, hey, whatever you did over there in the dating world, can you bring some of that here? So I spent just a couple of months kind of assessing, and I saw a lot of people talk about culture and community in, quite frankly, in platitudes. Like that these things matter, but there didn't seem to be a lot of understanding of how to actually do it. When you bring people together, when you design an offsite, when you design a happy hour, when you're trying to get teams to know each other, when you're trying to break down silos, there seemed to be a lot of awareness of the importance of it, but not a lot of understanding of how to actually design for it. So about 3 months in, I said, I think what we need workplace connection. Because right now, connection is sort of the thing that everyone is experiencing. And one of the ways I talk about connection is to first talk about disconnection. And disconnection is all the ways that we can feel unseen, unheard, or that we don't matter, we're just a number. And that can happen in so many different ways. It can happen, it's the unanswered text message, it's getting ghosted,
Yep.
It's your idea not being attributed to you. So when all of these feelings accumulate in
Is
people...
that particularly prevalent in a shared work environment, or?
I think every workspace has its own sort of... every company needs to do its own disconnection audits. Every company is unique. And so,
I'm
yeah.
crazy curious about, well, how do they measure what Lakshmi is doing if she's in charge of workplace connectivity? And one example you gave me was several people who were employers in workspace complained to you about their people weren't making it into a productive work environment on Monday mornings
yes.
quickly enough. It was like they were starting to get going at 10 o'clock. And so they called you to say, could you help us figure this out? And you determined it was what?
Okay, yes, I know what you're referring to. Okay, so I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with Slack, and Slack tends to, it does some really great things. It can bring people together around a common interest. And as you can imagine...
Both work-related and non-work-related.
Yeah, and not work-related, yes. And so I'm hoping there's a lot of Game of Thrones fans in this room, but I'm sure a lot of people may have noticed that Monday mornings were difficult in the office. The day after the show aired. And so I started to notice that this channel was like on fire Monday mornings, right? Just everybody was like analyzing the show and wanting to figure out what happened. And so we tend to think about in the workplace bringing people together around common interests. But to take it a level deeper, what you really want to look at is a common need state. So it'd be one thing to have a Game of Thrones, fan club or something in your office. That to me is sort of basic, and that's fine. But what I really noticed is what people needed is they needed support on Monday morning to process the show. And so I just wrote something. I said, hey, would you guys like a Monday morning support group? Because clearly there's a lot to discuss. And then everyone just went nuts and said, yes, that's what I need on Monday morning.
A Monday morning support group
and so,
for Game of Thrones enthusiasts.
Yes, exactly. And so what you're doing is you're taking all of these people that are online and probably not getting started, and we had a breakfast at 8 a.m. on Monday morning.
Now that's devious.
Yeah. Well, why?
Well, because they're not starting until 10. Now you lure them in.
Yeah, with food. Yeah, and conversation. But what was really great is there was all these people, and I remember saying the first day, like, have any of you ever met? And they were like, no. And so it was sort of like taking this seed that was this community that was forming on Slack, and then figuring out the right moment to activate their in-person connection.
I shared with Lakshmi a story about a friend of mine in New York runs a mid-market commercial and investment bank. And he had 2 of his 30 bankers were stationed at the WeWork space at 85 Broad Street, the old Goldman building. And at the end of the year, he looked, and they were the 2 most productive bankers of his 30-person team. And it was because they just hung out at the WeWork space where they had all these new companies forming, and became their friends, became their banker, helped them with their capital structures. And so he closed all his offices and moved the other 28 bankers into different WeWork spaces around New York and the outer boroughs. So did you see that frequently, where people were finding the fact that this environment itself was a fertile place to be?
Yeah, I was focused mostly on headquarters.
Yep.
So our internal employees. But yeah, I mean, what I was really, like I said, I think every community, every culture, every company has its own things that you need to look out for. For WeWork specifically, it was rapid growth, right? So I was always monitoring that and seeing like
So
how
were
to
you more
welcome.
focused on the WeWork team or the people who were in who were using your space?
Right. So I was mainly focused on headquarters, on corporate employees, but what I was doing was beta testing and prototyping programs and events that we would eventually move into.
Roll out.
Yes, move into our member spaces.
Anything really surprised you in terms of what you learned there? I remember you did a program where you tried to get people to know one another quickly, and you asked them to tell you something that they would like to learn.
Yes. So I've prototyped a lot of different programs. Like some of them will be like 2 days, some of them will be 2 hours, some of them will be 6 weeks. And so I was constantly trying to figure out how do you get to know your coworkers
Quickly.
in a more multidimensional way, but also not force intimacy. And I think that's really important. I think sometimes we think that everyone at work should become friends, and I actually don't think that that's true at all. I think what you want to do is you just want to create a space for people to get to know each other a little bit more deeply. And if a friendship comes out of it, that's great. But I try really hard to never force vulnerability or never overstep my boundaries.
You mean the bagels don't do it?
They can sometimes. It just depends. Yeah, it depends on the timing, the place, and the purpose.
Yep.
So that's a lot of what I was doing, was trying to figure out what do people need in this moment and how much are they ready for.
You told me about a fellow who had a daughter at home, and his big confession was?
That he didn't know how to braid his daughter's hair. So I'd done this group one time, and it was a 6-week journey with this group. And their very last assignment is they had to work on one thing that they had been meaning to learn. And a lot of times you'll hear what people say, like, oh, I want to learn this or I want to learn that. But there's something very specific in that question. What's something you've been meaning to learn? Because there's a tension in it. There's something incomplete. And so you actually hear about people's personal lives when they answer this question, and it won't be something like, I want to learn how to do a pivot table. It'll be something, a little bit more personal. And so he said that his wife had been asking him to learn how to do this to make their life a little bit easier.
Get her out the door in the morning to school.
Yes, but what's important about that story is it wasn't too personal. It was something he was ready and willing to share, and we got to learn a little bit more about him in the process.
Well, Lakshmi is just recently out of WeWork. As you may have heard, there's some bigger changes afoot there. And I know if I were looking, and I think I will be looking for a head of workplace connectivity, I think all I've done today is toss a ball in front of the tennis net, and Pete Sampras is on the other side. And you're going to have a wonderful opportunity over the next couple of days to interact with Lakshmi and hear her stories about some of the amazing things she did to get people to form relationships in the workplace that were productive and very beneficial to them and their everyday lives. Thank you, Lakshmi.
Thank you.